with a hmm, oh, of course. I'm gonna start out with a little bit of technical difficulties because if you don't, what's the fun in life itself? To have everything be in perfect order. That would require production of some kind of, measure. So, anyway, what we've got though today is a discussion on bias, on echo chambers in general, on some of the ideas behind what it is that makes someone think and act and do the things that they do. What is it that builds within a person a form and a nature, and how do you break away from such a relative misunderstanding of reality and true thought and action? And what I mean by that is, what is it, and we'll just go to images of what they think bias is. What is it that really creates within the personality and within the mind of a person a formal thought process which is relatively bound? It is intensely and inexorably controlled so as to not be based in a relative or a intelligent space. And maybe not an intelligent space, but an objective space. A space outside of your subjective thoughts and emotions. Um, so some of the initial, ideals that they're showing when they're talking about bias, here for just, the visual stimuli, related to the word, um, seems to say very little. Um, and that's fine, you can't ever expect, a word to, or a image to say 1,000 words. Maybe, this one here kind of, almost says something about bias, but not really even. Um, so, what is bias? What is the thing that really defines, I guess not really a unnatural or a, even bad bias, but, what defines what we would like to find out to be, the more negative bias that would destroy and disturb the true function of society. A bias so strong that it would hinder one from being able to interact within society in a way that made it so I don't know if happiness is easily achieved, but maybe your own personal satisfaction within the world is more easily achieved. And if you are biasing yourself in ways that, fights that ideal, then that's going to be a real problem. So how do you develop these biases within your own mind's eye and within your own form? And the best way to define such a thing would be to say that as you grow and as you're learning things, you are ingrained within your mind's eye and within your temporal, mind as well. The actual, matter, is, ingrained with a form and a series of thought processes which will help to open or close you to things through, uh, usually through disagreeability quotients, but I would like to usually think that, when we're talking about ideas, that it's not really disagreeability quotients, but instead it's some kind of strange biases that are ingrained. Because, although I have a large disagreeability quotient for myself to homosexuality, I could care less if someone's homosexual. That's not the same thing as maybe if I were to be grown in a, household that really disagreed with homosexuality. Maybe I'd be able to have a bias against it that would be so strong that I would dislike, homosexuals and have my own disagreeability levels related to my own sexuality. But see, I think that is much more not a disagreeability on an individual level, but again, a bias level that maybe is created in a societal kind of form. I say as I can't keep my ability to talk very easily here. So again, we're talking about, how biases are created, and what I would say again is that major biases are not created through maybe Gnostic thinking, through your individual self-mind. You cannot usually come to a series of biased thoughts through a Gnostic mind. And I feel like that's pretty legitimate to say. Mostly because the biases that you would come up with would be things that would be relatively sane. You would come up with a bias of, fire is hot. I don't want to touch fire because of its heat, but I do want to use it to heat things for my own use. So I have a bias towards it, and I have, this Gnostic understanding of it. But that doesn't mean that you would necessarily grow a bias towards, men with large beards. Or you would grow a bias towards, blonde women. Or a bias, negative or positive, or a bias towards, brown-eyed women. Or a bias towards, women with olive-colored skin. You would just... These things would not naturally become biases within a Gnostic framework. And what I mean by that is you by yourself alone couldn't very easily acclaim to understandably have a series of biases. The knowledges that you could gain off of your own understanding of the world in itself by yourself is not going to equate to a bias. That's only going to equate to knowledge usually. I think biases, again, what I'm trying to get to is the idea that biases are related to societies and they're related to interactions between people. We can move back to, the idea of the homosexuality thing. Could you have a bias towards homosexuality from just one other person who is, very against homosexuality, or someone who's maybe very positively for it, and you aren't, on your own disagreeability levels, right? But then, this person who you thought was a good friend of yours is, homosexual towards you, and it's very creepy because you both were drunk or whatever. It doesn't matter what your reason. I'm just trying to make this as, grand as it can be. So, then you say to yourself, oh, well, now I have a bias towards them because of this one person. See, but again, that's not from, an individual understanding from yourself. That is from your interactions within a society. And it could, like I said, it could be, that you just have some, or a series of family members that would get into this, form, and they would make you that way. And that's... Again, I believe that's biases within society and not something that you can learn on a Gnostic level individually. So, as for other biases, as we get into, the political sphere, I'd like to say that it feels to me bias is something that is generated and it's either shed at some point, and by shed I mean there is some point within the time where you are growing and understanding the world that you shed all of the beliefs that you held before and then reanalyze and decide which beliefs you think are of value. And I feel like that happens sometime, after puberty, obviously. And, even after you've started to maybe kind of rebel within your own mind's eye and have kind of reeled it back, even, that you start to shed those biases that you may have had that you thought were very normal, unknowing that they were these massive biases within your own, character, and you had these huge flaws. So, I think there's something to be said about that. Hopefully most people do go through that moment of shedding that incredibly biased form, because you right now very well may be in a state of trance, in a state of complete unknowing, unaware that the people around you are saying things which don't make sense if you were to think about them alone and by yourself, and you were to say, well, why is this, and this, and then when you get around them, you don't want to fight, so you capitulate to what is otherwise an incredibly stupid opinion, and you maybe don't even recognize why it's an incredibly stupid opinion. You're so biased within your own mind that you can't, get into a state where you know better. And that's, interestingly enough, this renders right into our next, topic, which is Wicket. It's not Wicket. I don't know what that is. I think that's something to do with cricket. So it's echo chambers in general. So the idea of the echo chamber is what you may be trapped in if you are in that biased state without knowing it. So the echo chamber, as it's defined here, we'll see if I agree with this. In discussion of news media, an echo chamber refers to situations in which beliefs are amplified or reinforced by communication and repetition inside a closed system and insulated from rebuttal. I think that maybe within social media that maybe is true, but maybe not within news media. Within news media, the echo chamber that's made is a reinforced thing by the editors. It's not necessarily something where it's insulated from rebuttal. It's insulated from rebuttal because the editors don't, care if you care to be, different on those, levels. But as for an echo chamber, when it comes to social situations, I would say that when we're in our biased bubbles within our most any social interactions and situations, there's very few peoples that are going to be completely and totally free of bias and are willing to have opinions which are outside of something that they've heard. But when you are within your group, or what you imagine is your group, you will find yourself being ridiculed, but very lightly. They won't be doing it in a grand way, but they will ridicule you very lightly for, the way that you think outside of what they think. And what's a shame about, people in such a way is that instead of gaining, because you can always gain from everyone. There is things that they will say or know or will be discussing outside of your normal echo chamber, if we want to discuss it in such a way, that is very valuable to you and your life and to the world that you live in, and is evidentiary. So you can literally find something of value that is obvious and within an evidence state, not just being talked about. So there's always something to be learned and gained from going outside of your echo chamber. But often what people will do is that they will manipulate and affect things within their own spheres. But they will very, very often try to go outside of that into a space which actually, will draw in, trying to be clear with this. You go out of your echo chamber, you're going to go into a space which is going to draw in more general information, and you're going to be able to, even within the echo chamber that you could say is your own mind and your own personnel and your own way of thinking, you're going to have more information within that space. So it's going to be very, very important for you to break away from the echo chambers that are created within a societal, structure. Especially something as simple as, these social media structures. You need to have the strength to be able to get outside of them. And let me talk though for a moment, because this is why I almost wanted to talk about this earlier when I had decided to do this as a subject, is that there is something to be said though about when you do get into these echo chambers, these deep echo chambers for long periods of time. There's something to be said about the idea that your opinions and your thoughts and the way that you're viewing the world is getting farther and farther outside of not the mainstream, but maybe the mainstream not in relative to like mainstream media, but the mainstream as it should be used in connection to, the idea of a river. That as you move your waters farther away from that mainstream, and you're going into these smaller rivulets, of thought and of, discussion, you might get so far away from the mainstream of idea and politics that when you rejoin it, you don't realize that you're actually seeping these poisons back into the mainstream waters. And so people who see you speak will say to you, like, what are you fucking talking about? This is madness. You're literally, this slow seepage from your bad ideas and finally coming back to us is, nothing but poison. And you don't realize it because you're the water, right? You're the one that's been out, in the muck so long you don't even realize that your ideas are complete shit. But once, somebody sees them, I mean, their reactions are so vehemently opposed because they're just like, what are you talking about? I mean, where have you been getting your news, and why have I been getting my news somewhere else? And when my news is all independently sourced anyway. I can't keep looking over at my fire there. It's very nice. There's just something to be said about when you do get yourself into that deep echo chamber, that be wary I guess you can find out very easily when you have brought yourself into that place, is what I'm saying. Because at some point, someone that maybe it's going to be an old friend, is going to respond to you in a way that's like, what are you talking about? what exactly are you fucking referencing in the way that you're speaking about the world, because it doesn't sound even slightly relatively normal to me. And, it may be that that other person is in their own echo chamber that's completely out of, whack. But, that's where we get into the idea of true Gnosticism and independent thought, and whether or not there is something to be said about, what would I say, really understanding the world from a sense of, yourself, and what you can recognize and realize from the world around you, and real things that it's very hard to say when it's so clear and evident in front of you, but there is something to be said about getting away from others' ideas and having your own ideas. I guess that's a very easy way to put it. So now, having said that, let's talk a little bit about some of the common, tropes or common ideas behind the politics of our, modern day. And so I just typed in left wing and right wing. When I think of the left wing and right wing, I think about the eagle, on our currency. And how, the idea is that, it's the left wing and the right wing of the eagle that, is our, republic. Something that people don't really necessarily understand is the idea of maybe the balance between what is left wing, which I would say is a politic which is both in favor of the smaller person and intent on trying to get them more benefits and rights, whereas the right may be more in favor of individuals and of getting people more, ability to control and manifest their own, destinies. While the left is usually a big government and the right is usually a small government, the left is usually a higher tax base, or the higher tax base, I mean, they want to tax at a higher level, and the right is usually wants to lower taxes. And these are all very big generalities when we think about these two. But they are very important when we talk about, the politics of, the modern day, which is that the left is often seen as a house to, or a place to house and, help the destitute and the lower in our society, where the right-wing politics has always been thought of as a place to try and raise people by allowing them to, have as little interference in their lives as possible. Lower taxes and give people more money so that they can do things with the money, and, that will be, a benefit to the society at large. Versus, the left, which imagines, no, well, let's just raise the taxes on those people and then we'll be able to benefit the society at large by having more money. And, both have their ideals and their, potentials. So let's see what they say, and kind of the first, kind of things that we see when we look at left wing here. So left wing politics supports social equality and egalitarianism. I would say that right-wing politics supports egalitarianism. Egalitarianism means that everyone is equal under the eyes of the law and under the eyes of, God, and, the opportunity to, get property, the pursuit of property. It's something property and, life, liberty, and property. And I think it's life, liberty, property. So there is no, fight about egalitarianism within politics. Social equality, that's not egalitarianism. That's a different idea all into itself, and I have no idea what that idea is. Social equality. Equality of social. So you're able to talk equally? Doesn't make very much sense. They're talking about socialism, but I suppose that's just a very draped way to say socialism. Left-wing politics typically involved a concern for those in society whom adherents perceive as disadvantaged relative to others, as well as a belief that they are unjustified inequalities that need to be reduced or abolished. I don't know if there's necessarily the relative need to have a belief that there's unjustified inequalities, that maybe the equalities are justified. But maybe that, they're justified because of whatever, that's relatively real. It's got nothing to do with, a racism idea. But are unjustified inequalities that need to be reduced or abolished? Yes, we can say that when there's these massive inequalities that we'd like to reduce them or abolish them. Yes, of course. If we could, we would house every person that doesn't have a house. How we would do that if they were on drugs and were just moving about and doing whatever the hell they wanted in society, God knows. But in theory, we could house everyone. That's something that are one of those inequalities that, the left wing would be trying to address, and maybe that I would be completely on board with if there were some way to justify it. It would be very difficult. But it would make a lot of jobs, would make a lot of apprenticeships for carpenters and for framers and for electricians. So it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. It would maybe make some kind of infrastructure for a homeless, crisis in the future if we could get this one under control. Maybe it would be a good thing. Who knows? So, when we talk about left wing, we talk about maybe modern politics and what something they could tackle. The homeless crisis is definitely an interesting one. It would be very difficult, though, to, say to people, okay, well, here you are, you're living in Santa Monica in a tent, and we're going to give you a free house somewhere in Santa Monica that we've built in some massive tenement, so that you have a free apartment and you have a place to go, and so you're not homeless. And then the people, like, in the, building across the way who all bought their apartments for $250,000 or something or more. I mean, what do they think? That would be very difficult. So there's kind of maybe some of the issues with, that same idea. So, well, what you could say, though, is, all right, well, let's make sure we don't buy or build a tenement in, some area that has even the slightest bit of ability to have money out of it, and force these people, if they're you force people that are homeless into living somewhere. It gets difficult. You can hear it from my very, very vague perspective on it. So when we're gonna look here at left wing and right wing, this is going to be interesting. There's a couple of interesting things I'm seeing. So this is kind of, I like to always do these very, very shallow dives. And what I mean by that is that, we're looking at some images, and we're going to basically look through them and say, what does this say about, when you first look up left wing, and DuckDuckGo is what we're using as a search engine. And the first things you're seeing are some images of left, center, right, and there's this real funny one up in the upper right corner, and so I'm going to just click on it. It says the left first right political spectrum. And I feel like it has some of this very, very wrong. Some of it has kind of right. But okay, so here we have left wing and right wing. We have a spectrum of slavery and slavery to freedom. And so on the left side they have liberalism, the idea of making things slowly more liberal, making things slowly more, taking away those things that we know are, standard and normal, and making them, no longer that way, and we're changing, into a more liberal society, and and that's fine. Just like conservatives fine, because you're literally saying, no, I like where we're standing now. I'd like to conserve, the space we're in, instead of going into a farther liberal state. Okay, so spectrum, kind of developing through that ideal of you want to conserve ideas, or you want to make the ideas, be farther expressed. All right. And so they try to say that the further expression of ideas on that, not trying to conserve things, is to make socialism. On the level of, liberal ideas of, maybe if we had enough food, we're supposed to give it all out to everybody. If we have enough, places for everyone to live, maybe they all should have a house. Okay, so yeah, maybe that's... But, if you were in a society that already had everybody with homes, and all of a sudden there was a massive earthquake, it would seem socialist to go and rebuild all their houses, right? But, really you'd just be conserving the old order that had occurred before, right? So that's interesting. Okay, so on the right side they have monarchism. So is that really on the more conservative side of things, to have a monarchy? I suppose that a monarchy is going to be even slower in its movements when it comes to laws and the changes within itself. So I suppose that is a more conservative. Is it more right? Is it more liberal versus, a more conservative, estimate on that basis? Is it because the thing is that, it would be a more conservative in a more slow way, but would it have more liberal policies than maybe some other places that are socialist or communist? And we can't necessarily say for sure. Now, here's one that I have a problem with, is Nazism being on the right spectrum. While it is very authoritarian, but so was communism, I would say that something called National Socialism should probably be on the left with socialism, in between maybe socialism and communism, right? Because it's a national socialism, where communism is definitely a national movement as well, but it is a national communism. So I would say that Nazism probably shouldn't be on the right there, because, like, again, even if we're talking about it from a conservative basis, should conservatives, if you're conserving things, how could you possibly change everything like the Nazis did? How could you possibly... You wouldn't... Conserving things would not be changing things in a Nazi way. No, you would not want to change all of your books and all your history books, and you wouldn't want to put these pictures of Hitler everywhere inside schools, and you wouldn't want to make new symbols for your country. No. that's not a conservative notion. That's a very liberal notion. That's a very like let's get it done. Hey, we're doing the right thing notion. So I definitely am going to say that Nazism needs to just swing its way right on over into the other side there. Maybe, past communism, maybe before it, because of the way they have socialism perched. So, in reference to communism, I suppose, again, is a very liberal in some essences, but very, very, I would say, authoritarian. I guess authoritarian isn't what they're really talking about here, though, is it? Because they're trying to make it seem as if it's funny how they put Nazi over on the right as if a conservative person would be a Nazi. That's so strange. I mean, see, so think of yourself as a conservative person in Germany when the Nazis were taking over. Would you say to yourself, "Oh yeah, I want this new fucking, this new party to take over my entire government, change everything, change all the laws"? Is that what someone that wants to conserve the nature of what's happening around them would say? Hell no. So they definitely killed all the conservatives when the Nazis took over. So fascism, though, I would say that there are some very, very conservative notions within fascism. Because you don't necessarily have to liberally do anything. You could just actually reel back in only conservative ways. So that makes sense. And anarchism for the very far left of the spectrum. Don't know if that's really necessarily slavery, but slavery might occur in an anarchist society. That's true. I would say that's not necessarily left wing or right wing. Anarchism should just be off the spectrum somewhere else. Alright, so that's an interesting little thing when we talk about, initially what they show you for left wing. So aside from that point, let's see what else we've got to look at here, because, sometimes what they'll show you is, that is to say, what some of the images will, kind of say to you is always a very interesting thing. Oh, well, look at this. This is kind of interesting. There's a different, left versus right wing here. And it does have Nazism over on the left side. And isn't that interesting? Huh. But they have... It's very strange, though. It seems to be I don't know what. That's funny. Yeah, because they have everything over on the left, which isn't necessarily true. I think what we just said there was a pretty good example of, relatively what's happening. There's some interesting things about some left-wing politics here. They showed a graph there about Sweden. They are doing very, very poorly if you wanted them to have any kind of conservative values, even slightly. But, maybe if everybody is liberal and they just want to liberate things in a way that goes towards what they want, maybe that's... I mean, is it liberal to go back to a conservative way of thinking, And maybe you're a conservative, So, they strangely have this. Here's another little, what would we call this? A graphic. And on one side they have the center. They have, to the left of that is fascism, socialism, and communism. And that's maybe true because fascism is probably the farthest right, like we discussed before. But you do need fascism to create socialism, and you don't necessarily need socialism to create communism, but you do need fascism. And, each is going further to the left. But on the right they have libertarianism and capitalism going towards the right, maybe halfway, where they'd have maybe socialism. Um, and I find that kind of strange because I feel like libertarianism is almost the actual center. Capitalism could be said to be a little bit farther on the conservative basis. At one point, maybe not. Maybe it was a more liberal thought process. But I'd say that the idea of, basic libertarianism actually is very, very centered if you were to look at the spectrum of political philosophy from a unbiased standpoint. But that's just my opinion there, I suppose. So let's we can move on from this small discussion we've done on left-wing politics, which, I guess let me sum it up real quick for, those who would like such a thing. Left-wing politics basically is the politics of the little man. It's the politics of the person who is not able to have his voice be heard and needs to have it be expressed through the republic. Or at least that is what we have been told, is the mantra of the left wing. It's not necessarily the mantra of the Democrats anymore, but it is the mantra of the left wing that we are supposed to be looking out for the small guy in society, that guy who's been putting in asbestos all day and doesn't realize that that's the reason why he's dying of lymphoma. And we need to be able to have his family be able to sue so that they can have money, so that they aren't destitute, even though he didn't know what he was doing, and blah blah blah. This is the idyllic form of the left wing. Again, not necessarily the Democrats, at this point, because they're being a little bit, less than functional in their role, as I'm expressing it at least. So, they also are, a larger government, or they would like to express a larger government within the structure of government. They'd like more bureaucracy. They'd like more I wouldn't want to say just welfare, things, because welfare can be very valuable and useful, but they want more overall government entities working and acting on behalf of the interests of the people as they see it. What else is the left wing exclusively, known for? You would think that they were for Medicare for all, but it doesn't seem that way if we're saying that the left wing and the Democrats are one and the same. So, what else would you classify as, left-wing talking points and policies that used to be? The left wing was very, very anti-war, and for some reason that's all been kind of shifted within the mind's eye of the people for some reason. And again, that's, the Democrats I'm speaking of. So, the left wing also is always, tried to be associated with liberalism and higher liberal policies. Usually, lessened drug laws, more apt to be, in favor of gay marriage in at least faster than, their right-wing counterparts, in favor of just liberal policies in general in that relation. Not a problem, for what it's worth and what they should be being used for, within the political sphere. The advocacy of people that are, not highly represented. That is the intent of the left wing. So, I think that that's a pretty good overview. Let's move to the right wing here and see what exactly. Let me just look at something here. It's not so bad. Let's move to the right wing here and see exactly what kind of images they have after we do a quick read here. So, Right-wing politics embraces the view that certain social orders and hierarchies are inevitable, natural, normal, or desirable. I, I think that that's got nothing to do with right-wing politics. Typically supporting this position on the basis of natural law. I, economics or tradition. What? Hierarchy and inequality may be seen as natural results of traditional social differences or competition in market economies. What? What does that have to do with right-wing politics? What? I'm really confused here. What does that have to do with right-wing politics? Right-wing politics embraces the view that certain social orders and hierarchies are inevitable. No, no, no. I mean, that's not right-wing politics that embraces that view. I mean, that's probably like, that would be like philosophical, or the philosophy on societies, embraces the view that certain social orders and hierarchies are inevitable, natural, normal, or desirable, typically supporting this position on the basis of natural law, economics, or tradition. What the fuck kind of weird description is that of right wing? So let me just, as a quick, you know, aside, what right wing is the ideal of liking where you stand currently and wanting to conserve it. That is probably the best description of right wing. It could be said that they want to have a smaller government. It could be said that they want less overall taxes. It could be said that they want less overall encumbrances when they do work, when they build a building. They want less, inspections. They want less of, just interference from government entities. That's probably, a very right-wing, view. But I would say that the first and foremost thing when we talk about right-wing is to, because we speak of them usually as conservatives, is to look at that word conservative and say it means to conserve. So at some point, everyone is supposed to be a conservative. At some point, you get to a state in nature and in reality where you liberally are done. You actually want to conserve things as they are. And the liberal, mantle is no longer yours to hold. You now are happy and you want to conserve your reality and your world. And there's going to be a state where you might have to, say, no, this is my state of conservatism. And you might think that it never would exist, but when somebody breaks into your house and then they're about to attack you, with a knife, and then you have a gun and you shoot them, you're going to say, oh, well, I guess I need to conserve my life, and that's a lot more important to me than. And so you realize, even you in your state of thinking, that never could you reach a point where you wouldn't liberally allow someone else to be, who they wanted to be, that you have to conserve at least yourself. I would imagine at least that would be what would happen within that situation. So everyone becomes a conservative within some state in their world. And within, probably even within their social state, there is probably a point where they say, oh, no, I'm no longer need to be a liberal when it comes to that. This is too far. And there's probably some very good markers for, where you'd say, okay, well, no matter how liberal I am, I don't think we should ever have sex with children. Pretty simple thing to say, right? It's not a very difficult thing to say. You can easily conserve the idea that we shouldn't be doing that, And you can say, okay, well, I guess I am a conservative. And say, all right, well, there you go. We finally broke you down so that you have to say it, in something that's fucking so obvious that now you're you're willing to conserve something about your societal norms. Now, having said that, almost a lot of everything else does just kind of fly. But we can't even say let's break it down another way. You as a person are very sexually open, and you're very graphic with what you'd say and what you'd do, but you'd never want to show anybody your body, and you'd find it kind of obscene to see other people in a naked state. So you wouldn't ever go to a nude beach. But all of a sudden, the town that you live in decided it's going to go nude. You know, wouldn't you want to go out and try to conserve your way of life and say, no, I don't want to go nude, I want everybody else not to go nude in this town, let's have that stay on the big beach where everybody goes out weekend anyway, that's fine, like let's have everybody go there, even so it's a freaking town thing, and I just won't go because I don't like it, that would be fine, but let's not have it be at the damn supermarket. And I think that person would be very right in their ideal to want to conserve things, even if they had, spoken very, boisterously about their own sexuality before that moment. But, they're in a different, it's a different form to them. That's not what they want to conserve. They don't want to conserve the idea of you not wanting to be slutty or this or that. No, that's not what they care about. What they care about is, the actual human form, that they have to see or something. And for what it's worth, I'm just making an analogy. That would work out fine. You can see how someone might be able to draw a line even from such a stupid analogy, while at the same time being much more liberal than the average person. So, there is something to be said about the idea that you shouldn't necessarily condemn conservative notions always. There may be some bad and there may be some good conservative notions, but there is going to be a state and time where you're going to want to say, no, this is my point, this is where I draw the line in the sand. Excuse me. And that may get very, very far, as, we saw from the Sweden, power struggle, it says there, for just how left their entire, democracy is going to swing. So, it may be that people just stop wanting to conserve almost anything. And that may be the case, and that might be acceptable. Again, I draw the line at children. I draw the line at, probably body modifications, in weird ways that are constant. That would be very disturbing for people to do in a kind of, at least constantly, maybe in some places. Yeah, see, like, that's it, maybe there are places where, yeah, you want to do a body modification, okay, go for it, but maybe you can't bring it over here. I don't know, it gets really weird, and so but you can see how I can spin things into huge imaginative, places where there's going to be people easily saying, oh, no, I want to conserve things as they are. I don't want people walking around with dog ears or something, or I don't want people, walking around with chips in their eyes that make it so that they can, see through walls or other things, or, whatever it may be. I can just go into a million different strange places. When it comes to the imagination of, what people would say they couldn't, stand. I mean, and for what it's worth, like I said before, there is a state where conservatism and where, right-wing ideals make sense. Now here's one that, I'm seeing over here, because they have, this, there's a thing that says, I am pro-life. I'm a right-wing extremist. Well, see, so I am pro-life in many aspects, but I'm absolutely pro-choice for the first 3 months of a pregnancy. So I'm not pro-life in the ideal that, you can determine for someone what's going to happen to them, and I am saying that after the point, but I will say this, and I've said it before, when it comes to the idea of being pro-life or pro-choice, if for some reason after 3 months you haven't, done an abortion and you didn't want to have the child, there are still ways to get that child to be removed from your body, by killing it with, penny royalty or something else. And, that's your business. And see, that's where I say, okay, see, so that's when it's your business. You can go to the doctor right after you've killed and say, hey, my baby, I'm pretty sure is dead. And they'll remove it then. And, they don't have to feel like they've, potentially done something which might be akin to a murder. Whereas, you have to, hold it, under your own sway if it's past that 3 month cycle. I think. And it is what it is. As for the idea of believing in God, I think that there is a lot of left-wing and right-wing people that believe in God. I don't think that that is a singular, institution. I believe in the Constitution. God, I hope that there's plenty of left and right-wing people that both believe in it. I own a gun. I hope there's a lot of left-wing people that own guns for what it's worth. I support the military. I think everybody should support the military in a very basic way. There's, that is to say you support, the people that are actually in the military. You may not always support the actions of the military at large, but I am a veteran. Well, that's good if you are. I believe in small government. See, this is, again, a very good, obvious talking point. And I think I've got another good one here. We'll go to it real quick. Interesting how they are posing this. I don't know if I'm going to agree with it, but let's look at it. So, people of the movement, like the bowel movement, like what the fuck's that mean? People of the movement, people of the order. It sounds very cultish the way they're talking. It's very strange. Social equality, social hierarchy. See, the right sounds like monarchy and the left sounds like socialism. This isn't left and right, really. Government should take involvement. Government should not get involved. Okay, that's finally one where they're kind of got it right. Private companies should be strictly regulated. Private companies should be allowed to work on their own. Yeah, that's about right. Again, it's the last point, sure. Economic decisions to be made by central authority. Unrestricted competition between companies. No, I think both the left and the right are against monopolies. If anything, the left has been letting them get away with it a little bit more, unless they're going to really crack down on them in this next, cycle that's happening with Biden. If they do, then great. If they don't, then it's clear that, they are... I don't understand what's gone on to our economy where we're allowing monopolies to exist in such extreme ways. Even if they're connected to our government, they shouldn't exist in such powerful ways within the span of the actual marketplace. So left is isolationism, and the right is international. It's very weird. Don't know if isolationism and globalism or, internationalism is, a left or a right thing. I think that both parties have kind of co-opted to the idea of globalism. And isolationism may be on some economic fronts, but that's usually maybe more of a right thing. But even then, no. So this wasn't very useful at all. Yeah, this is going to be more nonsense. Alright, so, let's talk for a moment about, the right wing, just as a wrap-up. What is the right wing? The right wing is smaller government. The right wing is less taxes. The right wing is slightly a more authoritarian bend when it comes to some things related to government exercise. The right wing is more conservative. It would like to have things remain as things are. than to have them change into a new state of being. Um, it can be, kind of obtuse and stubborn in the ways that it is, interacted upon when we talk about the political sphere. And that is to say, we've got things like, obvious things like, okay, so this is obvious to me and it still hasn't been made obvious to everyone else for some reason. We've got gay marriage, right? Gay marriage is an obvious thing that, should be made legal. But what is the word marriage mean and what does it all represent? If it represents a marriage within a church setting, well, then the church setting should be, in charge of whether or not whoever it is that wants to get married gets married under its roof. If it has to do with a relative change in legal status when it comes to the state, well, then we should probably not call that marriage. And we should call that civil unions, and no human should get a marriage when it comes to the state. So if you're a male and a female, you have a civil union. If you're a male and a male that's getting, some kind of legal interactions with each other because of your want to be able to see them in hospitals or, have, things be naturally given to them, instead of have to be given through a will because they're next of kin, blah, 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 then you get a civil union again. If you're a female and a female, again, it's a civil union. And likewise, again, for the next male and female that want to go, it's a civil union. They all get civil unions. No one gets a marriage. And if we just played it that way, then we could just have a completely different, fight when it comes to, oh, well, these gay people want to get married in this church. Well, then the church can say no because we can't control people's religions, so who cares about that point? And guess what? The next church that wants to have gay people, and there's plenty of them, will say, yes, we will marry you, but that's got nothing to do with the state. It's got nothing to do with your will. It's got nothing to do with your interactions with your, legal standing. It's got nothing to do with your tax filings, because the marriage portion has got to do with God and man and blah, blah, blah. Whereas we should, translate, the thing of the civil union into, being the legal standing within the state's, function. And marriage should be something outside of the state. And that's, would solve every religious problem that people have with, gay people getting married, because there would be no marriage. They would have marriage in whatever church if they wanted to, but the thing that we're talking about would be a civil union, would be a contract, which is the important part when it comes to legal, standing. So, and so, like I said, that's one thing that the right can kind of get in the weeds about when it comes to its over-conservatism, because when you want to conserve things from a time that was very biased and out of its, justifications, then I would say that you're not really conserving something that is good. You're not conserving the right things to conserve. And that's fine. Some people are old and they're going to die, and they're going to, the things that they care about that they want to conserve will die with them. And we would say that hopefully not everything that we care about will conserve and die, with us, is as long as it is important. That hopefully we can show others why it's important to conserve certain things. And, for me, obviously, the idea of trying to conserve, marriages versus, the idea of a civil union for a state, so that marriages can be, if someone wants to be incredibly orthodox and religious and they don't want gay people in their church to be married, then they can have a church where they only have male and female marriages, and fine. That's their business, And if that's where I'm willing to conserve things, versus saying that, no, we can't have, gay people be able to have standing on legal bounds, that's not something I'm willing to conserve on any basis. Of course I wouldn't be willing to, because I am egalitarian, and I think everyone should have the same level of rights, And if we're saying that two people can have an interaction, then I don't see why we can't say that two people that are of the same sex couldn't have an interaction, on a legal basis when it comes to the state's, recognition of it. So that's that's one of the things that maybe the right wing has gotten wrong, or conservatism has gotten wrong in the past, I think. Um, but then we'll talk about things like, the binary and the non-binary question of, gender, and you'd say, well, maybe we should be more conservative because I don't want to lose the idea of the female and the male, because those things are incredibly important to understanding perspective and reality. So, there are things that, you could say that maybe I'm going to be wrong in my view of that in 1,000 years or in 100 years. But I would say that I would prefer that we try to conserve that notion, because, otherwise you're going to have, no more female sports, because you're going to need to have transgender people being in those sports because they identify as female, even though they don't take any hormones to make themselves female. But they've only identified, so now they should be allowed to, be in those sports, because we're, having to just go based off of identity. And you see how these things start to get very unwound very quickly. And now we don't have a single, female that is on the record books anymore, because only males who identify as females are the ones who are, and so on and so on, until you get into a state of complete insanity. And that's not, I think, relatively the same argument as the bad argument that was trying to be made about, marriage and gay marriage 100 years ago. But maybe it is. Who knows? Everyone can be wrong. And, but to the point, we try to do things from a Gnostic perspective. We try to do things from a perspective that is, putting us and our ideas and our beliefs center, so that we can, at the very least, try to have a real and justified process when we are coming up with the things which are going to define the way that we think about the world and about our reality. We want to have a very centered perspective, and self-centered seems like a weird way to say it, but you may want to be very self-centered when you try to learn and understand the world around you, because it is from your perspective that you are seeing the world around you. So I would say that, whether you, feel like you fall more on the left wing or on the right wing, that you decide to remove yourself from all of it and say to yourself, what do you think is the right answer? What do you think is the way that people should be interacted with by societies and governments? And maybe, you'll have an exact question. You'll be in this echo chamber and you'll see this same thing come up, and then you'll break through and you'll realize they're wrong on some level. Really back away from everything that they're saying, and think about what it is that, how would you deal with this exact situation? How would you, without anyone else's understanding or relative insight, what is it that it's telling you? And hopefully you'll come up with an answer that will allow you to be unbiased, allow you to be in a state of relative tranquility and sublime nature, something that will help you move forward within this sphere of whatever it is that you're doing. And maybe it will have to do with the simple politics of the day, like we were talking about before. But everything is relates back to this Gnostic notion that you need to understand things from yourself, from the center point, and from the point of reality that is your perspective. And if you can do that, then you will find yourself understanding, why someone would want to be conservative in their nature even when you disagree completely with them. And you'll say to yourself, okay, well, I can see why I would disagree with them, and that is why I'm not going to be conservative in my nature in that exact aspect. And I'm going to be much more liberal when it comes to that, at least in my own life. So with that said, I feel like we've kind of gone over the basic ideals of bias, the basic ideals of, what happens when you get into that echo chamber. And then, we talked about some modern philosophies on, well, politics, as it were. So, I feel like we've done a little bit. We've maybe not the most useful thing in the world, but hey, good way to spend an hour, right? All right, I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching, everybody. Samuel Mittler, have a good day.